Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. If you didn't hear the announcement earlier, we're just asking you to put your name, pronouns in the chat along with your land acknowledgement and tell us what you're looking to learn today. Like what made you dial in over at lunch for many of us? What are you looking to gain here? Happy to see everyone on the call. Appreciate you taking up your lunchtime.
All right, I think we will go ahead and get started. So I just wanted to welcome everybody to AFP's CCF conversation today. We're super excited, as Michelle said, that you're taking time to be with us. I'm Allie Feebig, and I'm the VP of Membership for AFP Austin. Today's program is part of AFP Austin's Values and Skills Institute that is presented by Virtuous. The Values and Skills Institute offers a wide variety of programs on a monthly basis, so please be sure to keep in touch with the schedule. Before you leave today, if you can visit the link that Erin is going to put in the chat, if you have any ideas about future programming ideas or speaker ideas, we would love to hear that from you. If you aren't a member of AFP, we would love for you to join us. AFP provides ongoing professional development opportunities and is also a great opportunity to serve on a committee alongside your peers in Austin. Membership scholarships are available, and our next deadline is July 15th. I would encourage you to apply. It's always a great opportunity and resource that is available to our communities. Now I would like to introduce Erin Ozenbaugh, who is the co-chair of the Values and Skills Institute.
Kelly, I'm going to do a quick intro, some housekeeping, and then I'll pass it on to Michelle so we can get moving with our program. I am the co-chair of the Values and Skills Institute at AFP Greater Austin. The Institute is brand new. This is actually our first event. So thanks for sticking with us as I'm sure we work through some kinks today. The Institute was designed to expand on our bi-monthly programming. Our goals are to make the programming more accessible, more interactive than our kind of more formal lunches. So that's why we specifically chose the Zoom meeting format today versus the webinar format. We wanted you to be able to see each other. We're actually going to do a breakout room shortly where you can spend some time talking with one another. We are really interested in raising up some new ideas, hearing from people who maybe aren't heard from all the time. So again, I encourage you, the link that I shared, and I'll share it again, to our website has a link where you can share your ideas with us. What do you want to hear about in the Institute? Who do you want to hear from? So we'd love to hear from you. We're always looking for more people on the committee. We are joined today by Taylor Kidd, who is the chair of the AFP Education Committee this year, as well as my co-chair in the Institute, Melissa Miller-Dausch. They're both on the call. So thanks for being here. 2 pieces of housekeeping. The session is being recorded and it will be shared publicly on the website afterward. If you are not comfortable being recorded, please turn your camera off, and you're welcome to communicate with me by private message. Also, we have enabled closed captioning controls on the call today if you would like to read along as we speak. If you look in the tool menu at the bottom, you'll see the closed captioning live transcript toggle. You can turn it on and off and read along if you're interested. Let me see what my other notes are. Again, we want everyone to feel comfortable coming to us wherever you are today. Have your camera on or off. Have your babies in your laps and your pets in your background. We're all just here for a conversation more than a presentation. We will have questions and answers at the end from Michelle. We will use the hand raise tool to bring people forward to speak. If you're not comfortable speaking, feel free to type your questions in the public chat. You can, again, also send a direct message to me and I will read your question aloud for you. All that said, we're really excited to have a conversation about community-centric fundraising today. It's a new-ish movement that is gaining traction nationwide, and we really wanted to bring someone who's working on it locally to talk to us about how we can implement this in our personal practices and our local organizations. So with that, I'll pass it to Michelle to teach us more.
Awesome. Thank you, Erin. And yes, just to reiterate, we do love babies and pets. So please get them on camera. That always makes us happy. Okay, so let me just open up a little bit about who I am. My name is Michelle Vryn. I use she, her, ella pronouns. And for our friends who are visually impaired, I'm going to start with a little physical intro about myself. I have medium length brown hair, although you probably can't tell because right now it's in a bun. I would say in terms of like race, I feel like I am like ethnically ambiguous, but I am Mexican American and identify as a person of color. Today I'm wearing a black shirt and I am in my 30s. So I'm also calling in today from traditional Tonkawa and Comanche lands, which is known as Cedar Park. That's where I live. And I do want to acknowledge that making a land acknowledgement is just one small step towards recognizing Native peoples. And I hope you all like join me if you're doing presentations, doing the same thing. This is a step in becoming more accountable and respectful, having relationships with Indigenous nations and communities. And if you want to take it a step further, like look up those communities and donate to them on a monthly basis. That's also a really great way to give back. On the right-hand side here of my intro, you'll see a couple of my, I guess, like professional academic backgrounds. I have 2 degrees in anthropology, specifically environmental anthropology. I do have a social science background and I love social science. I'll actually bring some of that into the presentation today, which I hope you all enjoy. I started out in communications at a university at UT San Antonio, actually, and was stolen over from communications to fundraising and have kind of like been in fundraising since. I do have several affiliations that many of you may know me from. I'm a past board member for AFP Austin, so glad to be back with friends today. And I'm also on the AFP Global Marketing Committee. And more recently, I was asked to co-chair a new DEI committee for Earthshare of Texas. So a lot of my environmental peeps on the call, like I know you through Earthshare of Texas. I guess in terms of identity, I do consider myself to be an environmental conservation fundraiser, but also here today, I am brought to you as being a CCF Texas chapter organizer. There's actually 7 of us across Texas who are making all of this movement possible within our state. And if you're interested in learning more about like what we're doing, we'll talk about that at the end. But I will just make a plug, like there is space for you. We welcome people to volunteer with us and hope that you do. On a more personal note, I do consider myself to be very spiritual. I'm an avid meditator. I meditate every day. And I also really love live music. So I'm like so happy to see some things coming back online here in Austin, as I'm sure a lot of you are as well. Before we move on, I do want to just kind of briefly mention a story about the first time I ever really officially fundraised, because this is kind of important to how we're going to kick off. So the first time I remember officially fundraising was in high school. And as many of you may also remember, when I was in high school, 9/11 happened. And everyone remembers like where they were when that happened. It's the same for me. Like I was at school, very confused, very shocked, and that lasted like for, definitely the first couple of days. And I looked around and felt like everyone I also saw around me was the same. Like you just were so devastated, you didn't know what to do. And for me, I was also devastated, but I also felt like, oh my gosh, I have to do something to help. Like I can't just like not do anything. And I basically like grabbed a couple of teachers who are my allies and recruited the principal and started like a fundraising campaign like in high school. And that was like my first real foray into fundraising. And it wasn't like $1 million campaign, but I really felt towards the end of that I was doing whatever I could to help at that time. And I think that still is very true of my own outlook on life. I'm a very solution focused person. Like I'm very aware of a lot of challenges, but always like maybe like better steeped in like a solutions oriented mindset. So that's my fundraising story. Before we kick off into content, I do want to ask a little bit like, what about you? Like, let's talk about your motivations behind just being in the nonprofit sector in general. So this question, we'll just ask you to put your answer in the chat, but let me tee it up for you first. What most influences your decision-making, priorities, and style when it comes to your fundraising practice? And I do understand that many of us on the call may not be active fundraisers. Maybe we're EDs or donors or board members. So glad you're here, but just kind of like adjust this question to like what informs like your nonprofit intrigue or nonprofit practice. So I have 6 things listed here, and I know it's hard like to pick just one. I'm sure there's overlap for many of us, but just I'm asking you like just to pick one for sake of data collection. That the first one says, you know, I'm in this work to help my community, raise the most funds, fulfill my nonprofit's mission, to meet or exceed my annual goal, to actualize solutions to complex social challenges, or to make the world a better place. So stew on that just like for a couple of seconds, and please like put in the chat, which one best describes you? So I'm seeing a lot of 3s, a 5, a 6, a 1, a 5. Okay, cool. Yeah, so I'm thinking 3 and 6 seem to be, I know this isn't like verified data set here, but it seems to be like those are very common. And I kind of figured that's what you guys are going to say. Like I didn't necessarily know, but Colin says 5 and 1. Colin, I told you to pick one if you had to pick one. It's a 5 or 1. Because I feel like, yeah, I would pick like 3 or 4 of these if I had to. He says 5. Thank you. Yeah, so I think that most of us are not saying to raise the most money possible. Most of us are saying we're in this work to make the deepest impact that we possibly can. And maybe that's for our direct community or, you know, one that's larger in a world context. So thank you for doing that. I am going to pivot us a little bit from this motivations question. We're going to put a pin into it, but I promise we're coming back to it because it actually ties into my wrap up here. So before jumping into CCF, we're going to pivot into a little bit of that social science research on thinking. So I am kicking us off with actually a really recent book. I have it right here. I don't know if anybody's read it. It's called Think Again by Adam Grant. Adam Grant is a very popular organizational psychologist, popular in academia, but also popular in the mainstream. So it's very likely that you would have heard of him. And the thesis really in this book is he looks at intelligence. And traditionally, like with intelligence, we're taught to think intelligent people are people who know a lot and can learn quickly. Like that pretty much makes sense, right? Like that's how we think of intelligent people. But he's saying, I really think that the premise of intelligence should be on our ability to rethink things that we've thought were true for a long time and to like just unlearn things that we've adopted for a long time. And in this book, you know, he says it's not just like a skill set, but it's also like a mindset through which you approach your work, which I agree with. And I'll tell you like one story to really exemplify this work. And it's sets up actually the whole book. And it's about smoke jumpers. So smoke jumpers are firefighters who parachute in to tackle a fire. So this instance happened in Montana in the late 1940s. So not recent, but this is a real case. So there were smoke jumpers who parachuted in to tackle this fire. They had a game plan in place, and actually this fire, as they had heard it or planned, hadn't yet crossed this ravine to the other side of like this land. Unfortunately, once they parachuted in, like looked around at what the environment was they just dropped into, literally, they realized the fire actually had already crossed the ravine. So the plan that they had wasn't great. And the only way for them to escape that situation was to actually go like up the side of a steep mountain. So they have like tons of equipment on. That's not a great thing. And fire is actually moving at a much faster pace due to winds that have picked up, which weren't there previously. So this was like not an ideal situation to be in. And the leader of this group, he actually had this idea. So he looks around, he realizes, oh my God, like this plan I had is total crap now. Like, what are we going to do? And he looks at like the area of grass that they're standing on, which hasn't been burnt yet. And he intentionally burns it. And the guys around him are like, what the hell are you doing? Like, why would you do that? And so he has this idea to kind of revert the fire around where they are. And that way, like if they burn the resources for the fire there, it can't like go over the area they're currently in. And that's really only the safe space that they have, which really wasn't that safe at all. But it was a last resort kind of thing. So he does this, he drops his equipment and he puts water on a towel that he has and he puts it on his face and he basically just stays like laying flat while the fire goes around them. And unfortunately, like there were people in this crew that didn't do that and that did die. Not everyone survived this instance. And this model of what he did is now called building an escape fire. So it's intentionally kind of like diverting fires around an area that, you know, at least you have like some safe space to be if something just like totally goes awry. And in an ideal world, like they would have had time to pause, analyze the scenario, and evaluate options. But because of that leader's ability to rethink the situation and rethink it fast, like he survived along with a couple other people there. So this escape fire was really like a pure improvisation on his part. So you may think like, okay, like that's a cool story. Like, I don't know what this really has to do with nonprofits or CCF, but really what I'm trying to show here is I'm trying to drill in like the success of having mental agility. Like having mental agility is really important. And so let's take this to a little bit of corporate sector storytelling. So people who actually didn't have the greatest mental agility, Toys R Us, like I think we all remember Toys R Us, Borders. Like I remember like thinking, am I gonna go to Borders this weekend or am I gonna go to Barnes & Noble? Don't have to make that decision anymore. Kodak is another. And then of course too, we have Blockbuster. And when you look at these companies, the point here is they weren't bad companies with people who weren't intelligent. They were really intelligent for the time of their heyday. Like they had great ideas, unbeatable ideas in many instances. Their failure really came in by not being able to rethink in a dramatically changing landscape. So having that ability to pivot based on that landscape is crucially important. And I think we'll all agree. And Blockbuster makes me really sad because I remember when my husband and I were dating in undergraduate, like that was our date night. Like we would go to Blockbuster, like pick out our own candy. I would get, what would I get? Chocolate covered Raisinets and he would get Twizzlers. You know, we'd pick our movie, but like now we don't have to do that. Now we have Netflix. So, you know, like it's just funny how things change. The point here is the knowledge that we accumulated yesterday may not be as relevant as it is today. So things that caused us to be successful in the past may actually inhibit growth in the future. So speaking of the future, this actually takes us to our first breakout room exercise. And let me tee us up here on what we're going to do. So this is a visualization exercise. And what I'm asking you to do is to visualize the mission of your nonprofit fulfilled. And if you have like multiple affiliations, like say you're a board member or a donor, just pick one nonprofit and let's focus in on that one for this exercise. So assume your mission is fulfilled, like you've actually achieved what you're trying to do. What does that world look like? Like in great detail, like people are coming into work every day, like what are they doing? What does the community look like? For me personally, like I work at Bat Conservation International. So it would be to visualize a world where, you know, bats don't receive any harm, whether that's from people or climate change. Like I would have to think about what does that really look like? Also, I want you to ask who has decision-making power and who holds most of the resources? And where do those resources come from? And so I want you to stew on this for 1 minute individually, and we'll give you, like time here outside of the breakout room. Take notes, like if you want to draw pictures, if you want to type notes in Notepad, like do whatever works for you, but just kind of think about, what does this world look like? Where are the resources coming from? Who holds the power? Just type your notes for 1 minute, and then we'll prompt you at the end of that minute and put you into breakout rooms with one other person. In some instances, you may have 2 people, but we're going to ask for you just to share your reflections with one other person about what your mission looks like fulfilled. So I will stop talking, give you 1 minute to take your notes, and then we'll prompt you and put you in breakout rooms. So I will start this now. Okay, well, welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a great conversation, and we're doing this very intentionally for you to visualize what your mission fulfilled, this ideal future state looks like. And this is one more thing that we're going to put a pin into. It's all going to come together at the end, so please stick with me here. But thank you for having this conversation, and I really hope you made a good connection with someone else. And I also encourage you to continue doing these visualization sessions in your own work, maybe even considering doing it as a team. This is a really great team exercise. We're going to come back to this in later slides. So before we move on, let me do a little bit of an agenda check to kind of tell you what we've done so far and then where we're going. So we talked about the value of rethinking. We considered your motivations for being in nonprofit work, and that could be fundraising specific as well. We also envisioned the fulfillment of our nonprofit missions, and hopefully steeped ourselves a little deeper in what does the vibe of that feel like. So we've done these things. This actually sets us really well into jumping into CCF. So before actually talking about the principles and such, I'm going to give a little more context about the nonprofit sector in which the CCF movement was born. So let me go ahead and get us there. So why is there even a need for CCF? So let's start off here with this question. To answer this question, you have to understand, like with all industries, there is an iceberg model here that applies, right? Like we've all seen the iceberg model. There's this waterline of visibility. There's things that happen above the waterline, which are more visible. People get it, people see it. It's very obvious and apparent. And then there's all of these things happening below the waterline, which aren't as easily viewable or understandable by a lot of people. So on the top here, let me just call it a couple of things. We often talk about our impacts numbers, our annual reports, like we have positive donor report updates and positive stories that we're selling. As one thing here, I called out here, like the donor is the hero, is something we often see, and that's like a key component of donor-centered fundraising. Below the waterline, though, there's a lot of things that we as nonprofit professionals interface with, and it's maybe not as obvious to people outside of the sector, but I was calling out a couple. We have an inadequate pipeline of leadership in our sector. We've known that for a long time, and specifically Black, Indigenous, and people of color leaders. There's a huge gap there in having people being ready for these leadership positions that we know are coming up. We have decision-making made oftentimes through a lens of that privileges whiteness. One thing here, which I think everyone should know in terms of who's receiving funding, Black-led groups receive 76% less unrestricted funding than white-led organizations. So there's all these kind of like different things churning underneath the surface that, where some people are aware of more than others. So keep that in mind. And so that brings us to like, who's making decisions in our space? Like, what does the nonprofit leadership breakdown look like? First, let's talk about just the percentage of leaders, white-led leaders in other industries. And you'll see these listed out here on your screen. I mean, these aren't like super surprising to us, at least to me. I feel like I hear about this all the time, right? Like Congress is 80% white, although it's changing. Fortune 500 CEOs, 75% white. Executives and banks, 80% white. Yeah, like we've heard these stories. This one's interesting. The book publishers, I always try to put this in my presentations because 80% of book publishers are white. And I find this to be very important because book publishers decide whose story gets told and whose story doesn't get told. So, stew on that one. And who's teaching our kids, right? Like full-time college professors, 85% are white. So not thrilling numbers, but maybe you're not like that surprised. So how does this compare like to our own industry or nonprofit sector? Well, when it comes to foundation full-time staff, 75% are white. Of foundation board members, over 80% are white. Of our own like nonprofit senior staff, 85% are white. Donors are over 70%. And then in our own careers as fundraisers, right? Like 80% of fundraisers are white. And you may think like, okay, like we should know this, we should be informed, but kind of like, what's the point you're getting to, Michelle? I think that knowing who is at the leadership and decision-making tables is really important because they're bringing lenses of understanding of what's going to benefit certain groups and what's not. I mean, they're obviously bringing this into their senior leadership seats. And decision-making of like what's normal and what's best practice is really informed, largely by your background. Just to kind of like drill this point home, this is an actual bottle of lotion that, as you can see, I underlined here on the bottom, it says that it's for normal to dark skin. And of course, like the point here is like, who defines what's normal? Like I guarantee you a person of color in a marketing team didn't create this. This has since been pulled, but I did take a picture of it before they revamped the packaging. So just keep that in mind, like who's defining what's normal, what's best practice. So this is leading up to unhappiness in fundraising, right? Like that's where we're all getting at here. And in the Pacific Northwest, a lot of Black, Indigenous, and people of color fundraisers have been meeting regularly to talk about their experiences in fundraising. And, like I think that there was a lot of things they found in common. Like, wow, I'm having like really bad experiences, not being able to move up, or, donors are kind of doing some racist things. And because they were coming together as a group, they were able to tell, oh my gosh, like same thing happened to me. Like I have this exact same experience. And then after that, they thought, like, is it just us? Like, is this happening to everyone? To answer that question, they actually put out a survey in May of 2019. This survey had over 2,000 respondents of all backgrounds, and this was fundraising and nonprofit professionals. And it also involved a cross-section of leadership, right? So you had people who were incoming to the sector to like C-suite people. So this was a true variety in the data set. So what did they find? There's 3 takeaways here, and we'll start with number 1. The first one was overall, fundraisers and nonprofit people were unhappy with the current fundraising practices. You can see here on the top of this bar chart, it's BIPOC responses, and the bottom are white nonprofit professional responses. And so the top is, 72% said that they felt fundraising practices were either very harmful or somewhat harmful as they currently stand. And then white respondents were at 62%. So both ways, right, regardless of race, like people thought, man, these fundraising practices, they're not great. They're not really working for us. The second takeaway was that half of all respondents thought there was actually, they felt a decrease in diversity of fundraisers in the sector. And they also felt on top of that, that they felt like they were seeing people of color leave because of these current fundraising practices. The third takeaway here was nearly all fundraisers, and I mean like at a whopping 90% of people surveyed, nearly all fundraisers thought that the current fundraising strategies led to an increase in white saviorism. And as you can see on this definition box, white saviorism is when white donors like rescue people of color from their own situation, which takes away the ability of people of color to help themselves and really puts them in a victimized role to be saved. And another thing I'll add here on the white saviorism piece is it often leads to only addressing the symptoms and not like the long-term structural causes of these problems. So we're not ever really addressing the historical harm of white supremacy in our culture, in our sector, colonialism, slavery, institutional and systemic racism. Like none of these things are really ever addressed. So this leads us to CCF. And what is CCF? So I will say at this stage, like I am one of the Texas chapter organizers, but like I am not like speaking, I do not represent the entire movement. It is made of, hundreds and hundreds of people, thousands of people are in this movement, but I would, very eager to share my own opinions on this with you. So to me, I always think of CCF at the intersection of theory and practice. And what I mean by that theory wise, it provides a philosophical framework on how to approach your work, which is great, which is very values-based. In practice, though, it gives you very specific actions that you can take to ground your work better in equity and social justice. In July of 2020, the CCF Global Organizers based in Seattle launched a content hub with the intent of it being used as a global resource. And honestly, like in the first couple of weeks, there was like thousands and thousands of people in July of 2020 engaging with this content. And that continues today. Like we'll get to the content hub at the end of this presentation. I will point you there directly. But yeah, I mean, this movement has grown, and on Slack, we currently have around 80 city-based groups. So it is a growing movement. And the movement is guided by 10 principles. The CCF organizers, which I think this is very smart on their part, they say, yeah, like we have these 10 principles. This is what they are right now. These are not set in stone. Like they are, somewhat malleable. If we feel like we have to change them or adjust them, like we're open to doing that. But there's only been 10 principles thus far, and here they are. We'll walk through each one. Okay, so the first principle is fundraising must be grounded in race, equity, and social justice. And so here, we're not putting these three things, race, equity, and social justice. It's like, oh, maybe that'd be a great potential byproduct of our work, but we are starting with this as our North Star, and we have to make sure that, this is fulfilled and at the center of our work. Number two, individual organizational missions are not as important as the collective community. This one seems very obvious, but I do think it's something we need to highlight. All of our missions are tied together. And being someone who works in environmental conservation, we literally work like in the same ecosystem, like as other environmental nonprofits. And I think even for us, like we need to come to a better understanding of how we're all tied together. I mean, we're getting there, still a lot of work to be done. Number three, nonprofits are generous with and mutually supportive of one another. So this really means nonprofits should see and treat each other as collaborators and partners, not competitors. In order to really do that, you should be in active conversation and community with other nonprofits, especially those who are mission adjacent to you. Number four, all who engage in strengthening the community are equally valued, whether volunteer, staff, donor, or board member. So this moves the donor from being at the center to being more a part of like the circle of this work, right? Like everyone is valuable in the circle, everyone contributes. 5, time is valued equally as money. So this is saying money is not the only way to give back. 6, we treat donors as partners, and this means that we are transparent, assume the best intentions, and occasionally have difficult conversations. And I can tell you, like, for anyone in this group, especially people who've been fundraising for, like 10 plus years, like, you'll agree with me when I say traditionally donors have been exempt from having these kinds of hard conversations. Like, we have not challenged them to do it. We as fundraisers have not felt prepared to even enter safely sometimes into these conversations, but this is saying that they shouldn't be exempt from having social and racial justice conversations or other kinds of conversations that may be difficult. So let's prepare to have these conversations, but let's not be so scared that we just don't ever even consider entering into them. Number 7, we foster a sense of belonging, not othering. This principle to me really talks about being thoughtful to the way we're asking community members to share their story, to show up, to support our mission, and gets away from the idea that people in need are victims, but are also part of a larger system. And they do want to truly thrive, and they are part of the solution in decision-making. Number 8, we promote the understanding that everyone personally benefits from engaging in the work of social justice. It's not just charity and compassion. I mean, this one is kind of like easily summed up in saying our liberation is all tied together. And I think, like, you would agree with that statement. I do think it's kind of hard to really understand what that statement means. So I like to give the example of like, white folks benefit from anti-racism work and living in a world where anti-racism work is happening. Men, for example, benefit from a world that is safe for women. Like, we're all tied together in this. 9, we see the work of social justice as holistic and transformative, not transactional. This gets us away from the overhead myth, which upholds what Boulay calls the nonprofit Hunger Games, encourages funders to support core mission support, right? Like, we need to stop underreporting our core mission expenses. When we do this, it perpetuates the impact on all of our nonprofit colleagues. I know it's hard, but this one's really important. 10, we recognize that healing and liberation requires a commitment to economic justice. And this one, encourages us to look at the root causes of inequity and really forces us to no longer just be complicit in structures that do not actually achieve liberation. I know that was a fast run through. Hopefully we can put a link in the chat to the 10 principles, which may have already happened. Kind of live with these, think about these, which ones make sense, which ones are you kind of struggling with? Just give yourself some time. It is a lot to take all 10 in. And you may ask, like, from reading the principles, okay, so what does this mean, like, day to day? How do I actually enact this in my real life? Okay, so you're in luck. There is an aligned actions checklist. And this checklist, which is obviously free on the CCF website, it's about 3 pages, and it breaks down, like, specific actions that you can do to have your work be more CCF aligned. And as you see here, like, there's, you can plan how to do it, when to do it. So this is a great conversation starter. And if you have not seen this checklist, you have to see it. So we will put the link in the chat. You have to look at it. So actually, this brings me a little bit to closing thoughts. I know this is fast, but I do want to have time for Q&A. Think about the principles, think about your development team, look at that aligned actions checklist. And, I want you to really think about where we started in this presentation, right? Like, we started with the end in mind. We said that the rethinking strategy is important for us because, let's face it, it's remarkable how many visions and strategies were developed for a world that doesn't exist anymore. Like, remember Blockbuster, remember Toys R Us? Like, we want to change with the changing landscape. And so I asked you to think about, why did you get into fundraising in the first place? Why are you here? This is hard work. Like, what motivates you to show up here? I also asked, what does your nonprofit's mission look like fulfilled? And so be honest and think about, does my current fundraising strategy really lead me to fulfill that mission at a high level? And does it fulfill the reason that I'm like showing up as a fundraiser or nonprofit person? And I hope that you will feel you do need more CCF aligned actions in your work. And I'm asking you to do like one thing from this presentation. So the one thing that I want you to commit to is in the next 30 days, so that's by July 20th, look at the aligned actions checklist and think about what can you start with? Who can you start with? Can you bring the 10 principles to your development team meeting? Can you maybe talk about one principle with your development colleague at your next weekly check-in? I mean, we're all in different spaces, so think about what makes sense for you. But I am asking you in the chat, just commit to one thing. Maybe it's just, getting on Slack or something, then we're going to join the CCF community there. So I want you to put in the chat one thing that you're going to own and say, maybe I'm going to read more about the principles or talk with a colleague. And I know a lot of us may know each other on this call. So if you see somebody on the call, pick an accountability buddy, say, hey, Aaron, let's set a meeting for, July 15th, we're going to have a check-in. Did we do what we said we were going to do? Have we talked with our team about this? So do one thing. I encourage you to put it in the chat for accountability. And we can all start with one small thing. So this brings me to just a couple of ways to stay connected. Of course, you have the CCF website. There's that content hub that I talked about. We're also on Instagram and Twitter. I will say the majority of the movement is happening on Slack. So definitely join. It's free. If you are unfamiliar with how to use Slack and want to learn, hit me up. I'm sure there's other people here on the channel that are on this call that'll be happy to kind of help you orient to it. It's super easy, but if you have problems, let me know and I'm happy to help you. We actually have a CCF Texas sub channel on Slack. So you just find it by hashtag Texas and we're all on there. I think in total of everyone in the world, I think there's 3,500 people on our Slack channel. So it's a great resource. I could talk about this forever, but I don't want to cut us short on Q&A. Okay, so for Texas people specifically, remember to visit the Skills and Values Institute site. We actually are creating some content that was prompted just by being a part of this kickoff conversation. So check out that. And, to keep you in this equity space, there's two things happening this week. You're so in luck to keep the CCF conversation going. The first one is the CCF Texas chapter does have a monthly meeting. And the next one is June 24th, 6 to 7:30. And there's also the Greater Austin chapter here, our host is hosting a roundtable discussion about Edgar Villanueva's journal, Money is Medicine. So sign up for that. It's free. It's over lunchtime. So that'll be a great thing to kind of continue your thinking on this learning journey. And then July 14th, the Texas chapter of CCF also has what we call a Troika consulting session. Troika consulting is it's basically a rapid consulting, rapid fire round that you get learning and suggestions from peers on this call, real time, super informal, great people. Highly recommend that. And we'll also follow up with information as well if you're missing any of this. Don't feel like you have to write it all down. So with that, I think we're at the Q&A. I hope people are putting some stuff in the chat and I'm eager to talk with you all. Let me stop sharing so I can see your lovely faces.
Thank you, Michelle. I'm super excited about this movement and this work. So I appreciate everyone being here to learn about it. And Michelle, for you taking the time to teach us about it. There's a question right now about the monthly Texas chapter meeting. Michelle, I don't have that link. I don't know if you do have it, if you could drop it in. If not, Amelia, I'll figure out a way to get it to you. Again, if anyone has questions, go ahead and use the hand raise feature and I'll ask you to unmute, or you can type your questions in. I did want to point out for people who have been doing fundraising for a really long time, as I've learned about the CCF mission and as I prepared for today's presentation, I just caught out of the corner of my eye on the bookshelf on my desk my copy of Donor-Centered Fundraising, which has, been on my desk my entire career. And I thought, wow, Penelope, like everything you said is not applicable anymore. And it gave me a little bit of a heart attack. I'm not saying that CCF is 100% the way that we're all going to go and that donor-centered fundraising is out the window, but I just want to acknowledge for everyone who has been practicing for a long time that this is an adjustment, and you're not going to be able to turn your professionalship all at once. I also kept having the question over the entire past year, how do I affect change personally, locally, in my career? I don't hire people, I'm not in that position. And I have found their values and principles to be extraordinarily helpful to me personally. And then also for anyone who hasn't read Edgar Villanueva's Decolonizing Wealth, it's a game changer for your personal practice as both a fundraiser and a fund grantor. So I encourage everyone to pick up a copy of that book and read it. And the conversation on Thursday will be related to that book. Still not seeing any questions. So, oh, here we go. Missy Strittmatter has a question about Principle 5, Michelle. Can you share examples of it? Time is valued equally as money.
Yeah, thanks, Missy, for that. That's a super tangible one. I mean, one thing I always think about, which is really actionable, is like annual reports. Like I feel like we always prioritize listings by the giving level, which, traditionally, I've done it too, like we've all done it, but I do feel like that space to recognize people based on their contribution, like maybe it wasn't based on money. So like one thing that's like a good pivot is recognizing people based on like their years of service as a volunteer. So like people who volunteered, like 15 plus years, or being a donor 15 plus years, instead of just that annual total sum roll up of how much they donated. So that's like one specific example. And let me know, Missy, if you want to talk more offline, because I'm happy to elaborate on that.
Oh, no, totally get that. And we're working on most of that. I was just trying to see if there was something else like inside there, how we honor volunteers. I just wanted to make sure that there wasn't something else besides dollars and time being equal. I was trying to figure out if there was something else there.
Gotcha.
Do you see Brett's question about donors as sheroes, Michelle?
What do you suggest is the first step? Can you tell me, Brett, like more of what you mean? I'm not sure on.
Yeah, thank you for that. And thank you for this excellent presentation. I laugh, Erin, because I sit at my desk and on my bookshelf is, Penelope Burke's book, and have been a huge person to say, we've got to put the donor at the very center of all of our communications. It's not what the organization is doing, it's that the donor is making the organizations, so that's how we've sort of made that shift. This is now a new shift. And if, we talk to our donors like, you are the shero for so many women by stepping up and making accessible healthcare, or making people have the access to, the choices that they want to make for their life. So if we're going to change that dynamic and change that sort of language, do you suggest that is just a and do it, or is it a gradual, like,
Gotcha.
We need to step into it?
Yeah, I think some of this too is maybe like understanding the donor expectation versus what we're doing because we think it's what they want to hear. I don't think that a lot of donors wouldn't think it's an odd shift to say, this scholarship, for example, was made possible by this donor, but also all of the volunteer hours that make, this bus trip possible. I don't know. I think that just adding in a more complete picture is not only, I think, maybe a little more truthful, but it acknowledges other people's participation in this circle, not just putting everything on like, man, we couldn't do this without you, this one donor. So it's maybe like, depending on the organization, maybe more of a subtle shift than you may think. And I think most donors would be okay with that. Maybe not all, because I know some of them may not be, and maybe you do too, but I think most would be fine with that.
Michelle, are there organizations that are doing this well that you could maybe point us to as examples?
Yeah, that's a great point. We do have a lot of examples. I will say a lot of them are not Texas based or more. I can think of a couple in California and then Seattle as well, because this movement has like been around there a little longer. But yeah, I can give you like very specific examples, and I can actually give you like visuals to go along with that. So that'd be a great follow-up if we can add that. And then you can actually see like, here's this pivot in this annual donation letter. I think that would be super helpful.
Great, thank you.
Okay, then Amelia, I'm trying to, okay, you said, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think CCF and donor center cancel each other out. We're still speaking to what the donor does, but casting them as a member of the funding community or a community that is undertaking efforts to improve lives for its members. I completely agree, Amelia. I think you're spot on. I mean, I think it's a false dichotomy that I urge you to not make. I mean, that's my own personal take on this. Like, I don't think you have to pick one side or the other. I completely agree. Yeah.
Thanks, everyone. We are at time, so I want to honor that so that everyone can get on with their day. Once again, super thanks to Michelle for teaching us and having conversation with us. This was a great session. Keep an eye on the website for more to come. The topic next month is career development for fundraisers. So we'll see you then. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.